And good evening, everyone. We'll begin the readout tonight with what the White House hopes will be a pivot point in the fight for voting rights. This afternoon, President Biden and Vice President Harris gave a major joint speech in Atlanta, putting the full weight of the administration behind the push for new federal voter protection laws, even if it means that Senate Democrats have to go it alone. And the fact that they have to do it alone is notable. Take a look at this video. The year is 2006. Republican President George W. Bush is signing an extension of the Voting Rights Act. Now, standing there behind him is Missouri Senator Roy Blunt, who now thinks voting rights is a partisan issue. That 25-year extension of the Voting Rights Act was so bipartisan that both the majority and the minority leader were there for the signing. Oh, okay, right here, next to Hillary Clinton, is Senator Lindsey Graham, before he thought that protecting voting rights was a power grab. Fast forward to today, when the senator who will go into the history books as little more than a caddy to the disgraced, twice impeached former president said this.
As to voting rights itself, I think this is the most hyped, manufactured issue in a long time.
Now, let's just be clear. When we talk about voting rights legislation, we talk a lot about what President Biden should do, what Majority Leader Chuck Schumer could do. But what about the Republican Party that up until very recently unanimously supported and voted to renew the 1965 Voting Rights Act for decades, and who showed up at MLK Day church services bragging about it? Republicans joined majorities reauthorizing the VRA 5 times, including that 98-0 vote in 2006. And they were all signed in to law by Republican presidents. Republican support for the Voting Rights Act is Republicans' favorite talking point when you point out that their party has swapped places with the old Dixiecrats. So what happened between 2006 and now to change their support? Well, for one, the first black president, Barack Obama, was elected and reelected thanks to massive turnout from voters of color, giving the black Democrat an opening to shape the courts, including the Supreme Court. Well, Mitch and them couldn't have that. Republicans realized that voters of color could overwhelm them again in Georgia in 2020, electing Obama's former VP, Joe Biden, a black woman vice president, and Senators Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff. In other words, given open access to the vote, the increasingly diverse electorate was going to choose Democrats. So what are you going to do about a problem like democracy? Enter the former president's big lie, a convenient fiction that Republicans are gleefully using to lock those pesky voters out, because their political survival is dependent on taking power, not earning it. Last year, all but one Republican voted to block debate on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act that was introduced to uncripple the Voting Rights Act, which was gutted by John Roberts' Supreme Court in 2013. 16 of those same Republicans who voted to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act in 2006 are still there, including none other than current Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Today, in John Lewis's home district, President Biden called out those Republicans who refused to stand up to the disgraced former president's big lie, urging the Senate to approve the voting bill named for the late civil rights leader and another, the Freedom to Vote Act.
I've been having these quiet conversations with the members of Congress for the last 2 months. I'm tired of being quiet. We must find a way to pass these voting rights bills. Debate them, vote, let the majority prevail. And if that bare minimum is blocked, we have no option but to change the Senate rules, including getting rid of the filibuster for this.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says that he plans to bring up the voting rights bills tomorrow. And while the president's support for the rules change is welcome, it's also why voting rights activists are frustrated, with several groups sitting out today's speech, preferring concrete action over yet another wonderful statement of principles. Conservative Democrats Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema have already come down against any filibuster changes without buy-in from the same Republicans who have blocked not one or two, but 3 efforts to even debate voting rights. And today, without mentioning any senators by name, President Biden laid out the stakes for every single one of them.
History has never been kind to those who've sided with voter suppression over voters' rights. So I ask every elected official in America, how do you want to be remembered? At consequential moments in history, they present a choice. Do you want to be on the side of Dr. King or George Wallace? Do you want to be on the side of John Lewis or Bull Connor? This is the moment to decide, to defend our elections, to defend our democracy.
But the question now is, what leverage does President Biden have to get them on the right side of history and get these voting rights bills passed now? Joining me now is Aaron Haynes, editor-at-large for The 19th. Jason Johnson, professor of journalism and politics at Morgan State University and host of the Slate podcast, A Word with Jason Johnson. And Sherilyn Ifill, president and director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. While I quickly cough, excuse me, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. I'm going to start with Aaron and Jason, because the layout for me, Aaron, the politics of what the president and vice president tried to do today. What was the political purpose of it?
Yeah, what changed about, from 2006 when you had Republicans on board and back when voting rights was a bipartisan issue, what changed was, voting rights used to be part of both parties' strategy towards expanding, a strategy of expanding the electorate. In 2012, when you had that GOP autopsy of, kind of what went wrong for them after the election, the thought was, they needed to expand. They needed to try to appeal to a more diverse electorate, to try to appeal to, more Americans and to get them to engage with the Republican Party. That strategy has since been abandoned. And so when you no longer really have a strategy of expanding the electorate, voting rights is suddenly, not as bipartisan of an issue. So what we did see today down in Atlanta, headed into the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday on the campus of his alma mater, Morehouse College, part of the Atlanta University Center in the district, as you mentioned, a former Congressman John Lewis, for whom one of these voting rights bills is named after, is the president and the vice president really kind of using their bully pulpit to press for action in the Senate on voting rights. Of course, what we didn't hear was a specific plan, which is what a lot of those organizers who were not in attendance today, for how this legislation is going to pass and what they are specifically willing to do to make that happen. I mean, you heard both the president and the vice president talking about how they plan to keep fighting for voting rights. But what exactly is that going to mean? The president and the vice president were preaching to the choir. Down in Georgia, we know that voters in that state did what they had to do in 2020 and then in January of 2021. But he did also call out some in the congregation, right? But I guess revisionist history is kind of popular these days. But, literally the average age in the U.S. Senate, 64.3 years old, right? So he's literally hoping to channel their legacies, their literal obituaries, if you will, in asking, what side of the bridge do you want to be on tomorrow? Yeah. If Senator Schumer is to be believed, everybody's going to have a chance to be on that proverbial bridge tomorrow and make a decision about which side of history, which side of our democracy they want to be on in casting their vote with cameras rolling, watching.
Well, I mean, it's very clear, Jason, that, when the history is written, Mitch McConnell is going to be remembered as the Strom Thurmond of our era. He used the filibuster more than anyone has ever used it, probably in league with Strom Thurmond's use of it. And he used it to try to stop the first black president from being successful. It's very clear he is going to be Strom Thurmond. We got that. The only question is how many James Eastlands are going to be. Let's play Mitch McConnell first on his politics around the rules change. And then after that, I want to play Marco Rubio, because he was part of what Aaron was talking about, this sort of vanguard of younger Republicans who Republicans at one point thought could bring them in more voters of color and younger voters. It didn't work out that way because they still have the same politics. Here's Mitch McConnell first.
If my colleague tries to break the Senate to silence those millions of Americans, we will make their voices heard in this chamber in ways that are more inconvenient for the majority and this White House than what anybody has seen in living memory.
And Marco Rubio, and I'm going to I won't even play it, but he's claiming that there's no widespread effort to suppress minority voting rights. He said that with a straight face, right? That's the story, and they're going to stick to it. Are we at the point now where politically, because they've left themselves very little room to maneuver, we're just at a point where Republicans are going to get away with claiming they're not trying to stop people from voting and then literally stopping people from voting and stealing the elections after, if people win, get what they want anyway?
So, So first, Joe, I want to let you know that we don't know what the history books will say about Mitch McConnell, because when we talk about his voter suppression, isn't that critical race theory? And aren't they trying to make that illegal too? So we don't even know. We don't know what the history books could say about this when we get there. Here's the problem. It's very clear what their plan is. They want politicians to be able to pick voters instead of voters picking politicians. And here's why this is important based on what Biden said today. Look, it was a forceful speech. That's great. That's wonderful. The truth of the matter is, Biden said at a town hall in October that he was in favor of some sort of reform. I want to jump us ahead, not just to the future of 50 years from now historically, but I want to jump us ahead to next week. So let's say the vote to reform the filibuster fails. What is the next step? What can this administration do? This is the plan that activists are talking about. Don't come down here without a plan. I have said before, you could send federal election monitors to all 50 states. Hey, if you're violating people's civil rights, we will snatch your highway money. Joy, you've made the suggestion. Attach infrastructure bill money to election reform. You can't get any of this $1.8 billion. You've had Van Newkirk at the Atlantic that said, hey, look, if you're suppressing votes, that could affect reapportionment. There are plans right here, right now, that Joe Biden could have talked about today for what he will do if the vote doesn't work. That's why people are frustrated. That's why history will judge him almost as harshly as it judges Mitch McConnell, because he hasn't used all the power at his resources and he hasn't added a stick to the carrot that he was trying to offer to some people today.
Yeah, the excellent points. Aaron Haynes, Jason Johnson, thank you both very much, my friends. I appreciate you both.